50 years ago, actually on Halloween in 1971, the people on the screen lived a great adventure and birthed a new being in the Toronto media world. Thank you all for being here. I'm just going to run through and do a quick introduction of everybody, and then we'll get into the time travel and go back to 1971 and everything that went on back then. I got to tell you though, personally, I've worked with a lot of you. I've heard about virtually everybody here. If I were to start a newspaper in this town, there's nobody I would do it with quicker than the folks on the screen. I mean, the fact that you guys were involved in something that at the time revolutionary, daring, risky, and as draining as that experience must have been is pretty admirable. So thank you for joining us. I'm going to run through and just introduce everybody very quickly on the screen so that anybody coming in from the outside who is maybe not a Sun insider will know who we're talking to. I'll start with Andy Donato, who is probably needs no introduction, is the current and past lead cartoonist at the Sun, member of the News Hall of Fame, National Newspaper Award winner, all kinds of honors. Kathy Brooks, for my money, maybe the best, and I hope I'm not treading on any toes here, maybe the best pure story copy editor in any department. The Sun was the entertainment editor with George Anthony. I don't think people realize how popular this guy, and I did some reading up, and he was, I mean, his recognition factor among readers and so forth was 80%. It was better than some of the most of the sports writers, which is saying something back in the day. Very popular columnist. What a great entertainment section. Kathy Brooks and George Anthony. I mean, just great leadership there. John Iaboni, who I think I mentioned was a kid. He was a pup. He was 19 or 20. He might have just turned 20 when the Sun started up. He'd been a star of the telly, a young rising star of the telly, covering high school sports and that kind of thing, college sports, and was recognized for his talent and was asked to join the Sun because George Gross recognized that talent. John eventually became assistant sports editor with George Gross, and then went on to a great career working with most of the major leagues in this country. Linda Becker would have worked with John, of course. She was the secretary to George Gross and I guess to John at one point in the sports section. Varied career, spectacular career. Was on page 3 at one time back in the day. Played first base for the Sun baseball team. And as most people know, made it to third base and well beyond with Ken Becker, who was writing for the Jays. Joan Sutton Strauss, up there with the Morrisseau behind her, big time. Now, Iaboni was a kid. Joan was a rookie at the telly. I mean, had been a fashion writer, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, for really just a few months, maybe a year. Was also recognized, I think, by Creighton as much as anybody, for what she could be at the Sun. And I mean, she was big time. She was also a bit of a shit disturber, if I'm reading the history correctly, and left the Sun, kind of, I think at least twice, and eventually became, I'm not sure if I had terminology right, I think the agent general to the States for Ontario. John Downing. Talk about sort of legends and also the transition. John was I believe the assistant managing editor at the Telegram, Creighton. Creighton obviously recognized his true talent, which was as a political columnist. Was the Sun's first City Hall columnist, and with a column in this first edition. And he had that sort of bombastic style, but it didn't take long to realize that underneath that bombastic style was a really kind and gentle and very smart man, and it was always a pleasure to work with John. Cal Miller. People don't realize that back in that day, cops, like police reporting, was tended at a lot of newspapers to be kind of secondary. I mean, maybe the police reporters didn't see it that way, but here was this paper that was really, and Andy, you would, and I'm sure that was part of the planning. It was heavy on crime. And Cal was the orchestra leader. Jim Cowan, where are you, Jim? There he is. That's okay. That front page you see behind Jim, he was basically the first GA to work on that paper. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, Jim, there were 3 or 4 of you tops.
Absolute tops, yeah.
Glenn Woodcock, who's a late arrival to this group, but I'm glad to see him. And Connie, I knew Glenn as the associate editor and the guy who would write those snappy little comments at the bottom of letters, which I loved. Brilliant at it, absolutely brilliant. I was always a big fan of those and of Glenn. But he actually started as production manager. So in the time that we're going to be talking about, he was the production guy. He was he was responsible for, ultimately, eventually, he's the one who lined up a composing room and got John Webb and those great people involved. Yeah, Jack Holland, I see you right above Cal there. So Holland was, and again, I'm glad you can join us even last minute, Jack. I appreciate that. Jim's, I don't know if this is high tech, but there's the front page, and that's Jack Holland's picture. And this was a photographer's newspaper. It was one of the first. Andy, you would agree with that. And the idea was pictures got big play. That shot of Joe Zuger on his trying to lift himself up with a separated shoulder, I believe, was perfect for the sun on that first day. Anyway, Jack, thanks for joining us. And I think your perspective is, working for or being part of the startup of a photographer's paper, I think is key. Chris Blizzard, last but not least. Chris and I, of course, worked together for many years, but Chris has another interesting perspective, and it shows how things can change at the Sun. She was Peter Worthington's secretary, most of you know. I think she was brought in for a few days just to see how it goes, if I'm not mistaken, if I understand the story correctly, and then went on to a great career as education writer, as education columnist, I believe, certainly City Hall columnist, Queen's Park columnist. With her for many years, she was hardworking and extremely talented and popular, and is now sort of the royal expert at the Sun, and still there. John Downing.
Oh, I was looking at your version of Hollywood Squares here. I realized that if you look at Glenn Woodcock beside Connie Nicholson, beside George Anthony Kanatakis, and then in the upper right, we have Kathy Brooks. There is a direct relation of a key part of the Toronto Sun back to the middle years of Ryerson journalism in 1964, 65, 66, and 67, that they all, and then Ray Biggard was part of that. Hartley Stewart was part of that. So we should remember that when the 62 started from the 1200 at the Telegram, one of the key components of the group that Doug Creighton enlisted as part of the Toronto Sun came from the middle years of Ryerson in the 1960s.
Let's go back to the beginning, and maybe even before the beginning, when the Sun was conceived and what the rationale was, and the name, how the name came about, and the look of it. Andy, why don't you pick it up from here? You were heavily involved in that from the beginning. I think you named the Sun, didn't you? Didn't you come up with the name? Can you tell us?
Originally, the mock-up that was made up to try and convince John Bassett to write a morning tabloid, I think it was just called The News. I don't know who came up with the Sun. I know I came up with the logo, but that was different. There are rumors flying around after Bassett ended the Telegram. A group that became known as the Silver Seven. And John, you might be able to confirm this. People like Fraser Kelly, Andy McFarlane, and even Johnny F. Bassett were talking about starting another paper. Eventually, I guess it all got down to Creighton, Hunt, and Worthington. And the problem then was getting the money. I know Doug, when I was hired by Doug, I was doing a few odd little things for the paper, but there was no money. And they got into a group with Stanley Randall and a lawyer named Hyde. And they were the guys that were going to come up with all the money. So the Friday before the Thanksgiving Day weekend, Peter told me that if they don't get the money that day, the deal was off. So I plan to go up north and become an artist and a painter and not worry about it. And sure enough, when I came in Tuesday morning, Doug waved at me to come into his office and said, "Get going, we've got the money." And it was, the old story Eddie Goodman put together. I think it was Rudy Brady, Al Latner, Phil Roth, Paul Hellyer, Jack Diamond were the 5 big developers that put up, I think it was $650,000, and then away we went. So in 2 weeks or 3 weeks, we had to find the Eclipse building, set up an office, and organize everything, and the son was born.
In the Eclipse building.
In the
No
Eclipse,
superstition there.
Eclipse underwear building,
Good one, Joe.
322 King Street West. Anyway, it was a bit of a zoo. I mean, it was something I'll never forget. Great place to work. There was a huge drying machine that ran through the entire editorial department, and the people that occupied the 4th floor before us. There was a company that did silkscreen posters for Disney, and they were packing up and getting out while we were setting up to get started. And
You
eventually,
remember how cold it was when they knocked a hole in the wall to take that drying machine out?
I was just going to mention that.
Very hard to type with gloves on.
Oh, yeah. It was. And
It was
Joan,
freezing cold, and we were always covered with plaster dust.
yeah,
When you plugged in the kettle, the lights all went out.
that's right.
That's true. I'd forgotten that.
Yeah.
I always had a candle at my desk in case the lights went out, and I kept it there. It came on a cake. A lot of people brought food in that first week.
Uh-huh.
Do you remember that? People
Yeah.
and Rimstead would bring little parades of people through so that they could see where we were coming from. It was so funny, and they would bring food. And I saved a candle from one of those cakes and used it to light my desk when the lights went out. I gave it to Doug Creighton on the anniversary of the son's 25th anniversary. I gave it to him, so he had that candle. That's how long I had it, 25 years.
I remember a debate about what was the lifestyle section called at the beginning. Was it the women's section in the
No.
the Sun, or was it always called lifestyle?
No, it was lifestyle.
Yeah.
Okay. In the first
Yeah.
edition, there's not even a name. It just
That,
sort of
that
goes.
was a debate that Kathy and I had with the 3 men to change the name. Kathy and I worked together on the fashion pages at the Tilly, and we were determined that the Sun would not have a women's department.
Money, we forget how important money was back then to us.
Oh, yeah.
And Don was the guy who held it all together that way.
It was one of the debates I had with Don Hunt because of the massage parlor advertising.
Oh, yes.
I mean, it was a steady source of income, and he wasn't going to give it up. But I couldn't get the fashion ads in until we got rid of that. So,
And they got rid of those, I think.
yes, they did,
dropped,
yes.
yes.
Yeah, I remember Tess Hellman was the classified manager, and she hated the massage ads, and she was and she was also policed the ones that sort of came in under the radar, so to speak. Some of them were disguising themselves, so she was quite funny.
Jack Holland, can you hear me? Okay, Jack.
Thanks.
Good. Andy started talking about the Sunshine Girl and how that evolved. You were obviously part of the development of that. In the first edition here, the Sunshine Girl looks like somebody you met at the counter at Henry's Photoshop. Can you talk a little bit about how the Sunshine Girl came about and how it was approached by you and Cooper and Betts in the photo department?
Well, the best thing about being a photographer at the Sun at the time was a fridge full of cold beer.
Things have changed a bit. Jack.
The Sunshine Girl was a spin-off of all that that we, Dick Luke's Woman and the girls of General Motors, CBIBC, and then the Sunshine Girl developed from that.
The Sunshine
Well,
Girl.
I used to take photos. The UPI did a Florida weather girl every day.
That's right.
And somebody in a bikini, and I'd take them to Monteith, and he'd throw them in his garbage pail. So I thought, well, I've got some space at the back of the paper on the feature pages, which I laid out, and I started running the Florida weather girl, and she kind of morphed into the Sunshine Girl. And as I remember, doing the Sunshine Girl was one of Jack Holland's least favorite things.
Yeah.
It's true, because Jack tells a story about Holland's Gallery. I don't know whether that was at the Telegram or at the Sun, where he would have to take pictures, but he only wanted to take pictures of lovely girl next door. And
Yeah.
so the Sunshine Girl morphed into the Sunshine Girl. He wanted to avoid it. Yeah.
Linda Becker, you were a Sunshine Girl at
Yes.
one point in your career at the Sun. What did you think of the whole Sunshine thing?
Well, at the time, it was fun for me. I was very young, and I loved having my picture taken and appearing in the newspaper. That was for me. I mean, but today it's different. I have 2 daughters and 2 granddaughters, and I've brought them up to so they would understand that it's more important to be smart than to be pretty, but they're both. So I'm lucky that way. They're lucky. But yeah, no.
It was a dirty environment. I mean, it had been a silk screen printing operation, as Andy said, and I always remembered how filthy the men's bathroom was. I don't know about the women's, but the men's bathroom was
Disgusting.
awful. And then when we got our own building in 1975, I remember thinking, oh, at last, a men's washroom that will be clean and have more than one urinal. And I walked in for the first time, and it had one urinal. But it was
Glenn,
clean.
at the early times, the very beginning, there was no women's washroom on the second floor where we were. I had to go to another floor. And if I was on deadline, I didn't. I just zipped into the men's and got yelled at.
Do you remember I hired my uncle, Frank Benedetti,
Certainly.
who was
Cadillac.
his 55 Cadillac.
76 Cadillac.
But you had to, what was the procedure? We needed photographs. Did we have to go over to the telly and get them in the library record room? Or did they, because all those files weren't moved till we moved to the.
They were moved later. That's right.
Yeah, right. And then he had to drive back and forth to inland. If we had to do it in today's traffic, we'd never get a paper out.
No, no. And then we had to hire Peter Heskey as a second driver.
Oh, that's right. We did. Yeah. Good God.
And then after a while, we were so successful that we were printing at 3 different plants.
Yeah.
And I had to lay out the ads, the color ads, differently for each one because of the way they webbed their presses. Nobody had like a color position on page 17, so the paper was a little different depending on what plant printed it. But yeah, we had a delivery man who delivered in a 1976 Cadillac Eldorado.
That's right. And then we got him a Volkswagen.
Yeah.
Didn't Pierre Burton and Charles Templeton say that they would eat crow if we lasted a year?
Yes, we did.
And Lord Thompson have said the same thing. And I did that Photoshop before Photoshop,
Yeah.
where we posed 3 of our guys in business suits, took their picture. Then I took Thompson's head and Pierre Burton's head and Templeton's head, got them lit up the right way and stuck them on those bodies, all eating a crow that we got from the museum somewhere. And it worked out pretty good. We did a poster of it. Yeah.
George Anthony, you have your hand up.
Oh, yeah, thanks. I have to go. So,
Oh, George.
sorry, I have another appointment. There's a lot of things I remember, all fun, including stealing all the staplers the last day of the telly and bringing everything over to the building. Everything we could stuff in our bags went with us. But it's so great to see everyone. And especially after the pandemic we've been through and are still in part of. And Mike, thank you so much for doing this. And I thought John Cosway would be on the call, but he isn't. But he's just done an amazing job of keeping the flame aglow. So thanks so much, everybody. So lovely to see you. And I want to see the finished product.
Thanks, George. And Causeway is lurking here somewhere. He's behind one of these.
Good. Take care. Oh,
And
just
Kathy-
before I just want to show you this Donato mug.
I still have one too.
My God.
All right. The other thing,
Yeah.
I don't even remember this one.
I want to say before George goes, George, how much I appreciate the help that you and Kathy gave me. I couldn't have survived without you. You are so generous with your knowledge and your contacts. You're really an extraordinary human being.
He sure is.
That's very nice. Thank you
And
so
that's,
much.
that's not your eulogy.
That's a hell of an exit note.
I'd have to check with Kathy to find out if it is or not, because I can't do anything without checking with Kathy. Thanks,
Listen,
Kathy.
George, I
Yes.
just want to say hallelujah for having all those years together. Thank you so much. We had so much fun. I
Sure.
love being your rudder, and I love that you were the sail.
We had an amazing amount of fun, really.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was really something. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, George.
Bye.
All the best. And Kathy, isn't this always the way? George goes off to schmooze with some celebrity or whatever and leaves you holding the bag. Jim Cowan, we've talked a little bit about sort of the atmosphere at the beginning of the Sun, and in particular how it related to equipment and the surroundings and everything else. You were a GA. You'd come over from the telly, right? Where big operation, lots of
Yeah,
GA
that's correct.
and everything else. And there's basically you, an elevator, and George Gross, and that's about it.
A little more than that.
What's you're in there. What was it like for you that night, or leading into that night?
Well, I think I might have been one of the last of the hires. I may have been the first GA reporter, but I was one of the last ones hired. And I can't remember if it was Worthington or it might have been Ray Biggert that called me to offer me the job about a week before the Sun started. I guess they realized they needed someone to fill all the holes between the columns. So I had nothing better to do, so of course I joined. And it was I don't know, Cal, maybe you can add something to this, but it was quite amazing because whereas at the telly we had our beats, I was at City Hall for most of my time at the telly, and then to be thrown in as the general assignment and never really knowing exactly what you were going to be doing when you went in was a bit of a change. The other big change was we all became two-way men. We all started carrying cameras. Which I'm not sure the photographers cared for too much, but that was the way it was. And so many of the things that I got into the paper actually were photos rather than stories. But I'll tell you one thing about the culture at the Sun at the start. I went through that first edition today, and there are bylines for almost everybody in the sports department. There are bylines for almost everybody in the entertainment department. The only byline of a news reporter is Bob McDonald's on page 1. It hadn't struck me until I looked at it today that the emphasis on the paper was certainly not on hard news. I think it took me till the Wednesday or Thursday to get a byline in the paper.
Basically, when the Sun started, it was don't miss anything. I've got Kenny Robertson and myself on the police desk, and we're saying, how on earth could we cover everything? And it was Peter Worthington who actually brought it around, and he said, cover the stories that you can far better than what the other papers are covering, and pick out something that they don't have, and you can expand on it. And quite often we took a convenience store robbery and wrote about the store manager, the store owner, and what he had gone through to open that store, often coming from a country where they had nothing and building a new life in Canada. And those stories were what the Sun really covered, and the Star lacked. We added that human element to it. And reminded me, the Telegram used to be the Telegram Cares. And when I got to the Sun, I thought the Sun had a heart and a soul, and really matched what the Telegram had done. And that's my memory of working at the paper.
And as time progressed, Cal, and we talked about this a little bit earlier about how, the emphasis on hard news. My impression of the paper is that over time, the hard news emphasis grew. I mean, in other words, police stories started to get really big play, and there was a lot more of that kind of local hard news edge, in particular as it relates to crime.
Yeah, with a police story, you could almost guarantee it would be on page one. Initially, they were running huge pictures on page one, and eventually they started taking those pictures down to size and carrying a story. And quite often, it was the police story that made the headline. And Jim made mention of the police shootings. There were 4 police officers killed in 1 year, and they generated huge amounts of copy for the Sun. And I think that's when they realized that crime sold newspapers.
And the other difference too, Cal, is that, and this applies to everybody who was involved in those days. It was not only was there, the competition, but there was like one of you for every 6 or 7 or 10 of them.
Exactly, and they'd have an army.
Entertainment, sports, all those areas. You were always outgunned.
They'd have an army for every story.
Yeah.
The other thing we have to remember about the Sun in those early days was, without home delivery and being reliant entirely on box sales, the thing that grabbed people's attention was the big picture on page one. We did still, as even from the first edition, we still had copy on page one. I think it was when Phil Sykes moved in, which was after my time, but he went to a real tabloid front page, a British tabloid style of front page, and pretty much lost the copy. But that was it. We knew, we could measure, and Glenn probably could talk to this better than I can. But it was always known that on days when we had a really good front page picture, the boxes sold out.
Oh, yeah.
And on days when there wasn't anything happening, not so much.
John Iabona, you have your hand up?
Yes, I just wanted to chime in on the fact that we were never to ever use the excuse that the other papers had an army when we were the only one to go cover a sporting event. We had to come up with the story. We had to get the story right. And so I think what ended up happening throughout the paper was that people would go cover stuff, and instead of coming up with one angle, they would have 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 angles. I mean, we worked our asses off. We tried to establish this attitude that we weren't going to be denied on anything. And that reflected in everything that we did, because as a family, and Glenn would remember this very, very well, because he was the first coach of our softball team. So we didn't have the stars that the Star did, the Toronto Star with Marty Goodman, especially when he pitched, nobody could touch him. But when we would go play those games, and Peter was at second base, and Andy was behind the plate, and Rimmer was pitching, and whatever, and Dick Shadow was our first shortstop, we might have lost the game, but they knew they played the Toronto Sun. And when we would play these benefit games around celebrity games to raise money, especially against CFRB, they would show up thinking this was going to be a really fun time, and then we would whip their asses. And they would hate us afterwards for that. But this is what we did. I mean, people started to know that we were there. It didn't matter what department you were talking about. The personalities came out right from the get-go, and nobody was going to beat us. And if they beat us, they were in for a heck of a tussle to get that story before us.
Well, it was Worthington's policy that we would accept any invitation to play anybody at any sport. I remember we played a soccer game at Varsity Stadium.
Yep.
We played lacrosse, or tried to. We played ball hockey at my old high school, Bloor Collegiate.
Yeah,
and the one thing I remember about that game, John, is you were just so fantastic in goal. They kicked our asses, these kids, but you were magnificent that night.
But but the point was, Glenn, it didn't matter what we were doing.
No.
They knew that this wasn't, a bland, this was a group that was there. We had fun, and we might have lost, but after the game was over, they knew they played a game.
Well, the softball team didn't lose all that often. It was pretty good.
Yeah.
And we'd get,
we went the one.
FRB, it would be cross promoted in the Sun and on the radio, and we'd get more than 1,000 people turned out to watch a bunch of amateurs play ball.
Do you remember, Glenn, the one disastrous thing we did for sports was wheelchair basketball? We went out against a group of guys who were in.
I wasn't involved in that.
I was, unfortunately. It was Worthington got us into that, and what a disaster that was. It lasted about 5 minutes.
Yeah, they would have killed you. You talk about playing an actual wheelchair basketball team, they would have run you off the court.
Oh, they did. Yeah.
To an outsider, how would you explain Doug Creighton? You look at the guy. People fall. It was almost like following it's almost like godlike status. Even now, after all this time, and he was so much sort of weaved through, or woven through the fabric of the Sun for all that time. What is it about what made Creighton that kind of influence and that kind of personality? Was it just charisma? What was it? John Downing, you wanted to say?
Well, he was very personable, and he took his partners with a grain of salt, and so did they. I mean, it was interesting to watch Peter Worthington as Chris Smales Blizzard knows. I mean, Peter and Doug would diametrically be opposed to something, but you would never quite, it would always work its way out until the end. But the fact was that Doug was the glue that kept the place together because he was so personable, and he never forgot. If you did him a favor, and he was very loyal. When Glenn Woodcock went west, when he came back, I can remember the budget meeting where I suggested that Glenn fill in for Peter Simpson, who was going somewhere else. And Doug nodded approvingly at me as if this was the kind of way that you were supposed to operate. And I think, so all of us developed an affection for him.
When I left to go to the Star, he was pretty angry. And when I called him to tell him that I was ready to come back, he said, I wish I could tell you we didn't need you, but we do, so you better come back. And we were friends until he died. I mean, socially and professionally. And something happened in Doug's family during the Depression. I can't remember the details, but his father lost his job or something, and there were no benefits. And that was one of the great movers for him in making sure that the benefit plan for the Sun employees was what it was. And also he and all three of them were absolutely determined that there would never be a union. So they wanted profit sharing and the things that would keep the employees loyal through generosity.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you can't blame them for never wanting a union, Joan, because it was the union that really killed the Telegram.
Yes.
They didn't believe Bassett when he said he had no money to give them raises.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Linda Becker, did you sense that sort of, I mean, you wouldn't have been, I presume anyway, working as closely with Creighton and so forth as maybe Joan and Andy. But did you sense that Doug, that there was this sort of, kind of not mythical, but sort of this guy who was kind of like the.
Oh, absolutely. He was very caring towards everyone. He treated everyone well, and not just, his partners or his buddies. He was fair. He was very fair to everyone and gave you a second chance, third chance. He definitely a special guy for sure.
He always had your back.
Kathy, one of the things that the Sun revolutionized, really, or was one of the first, was the Sunday paper, which would have been what, 2 or 3 years after the start, something like that.
Yeah.
If I'm not mistaken, was it more than that? Okay, but at the time that was a big deal. I mean, Toronto the Good, and I think there were there'd long been opposition from churches and so forth. Kathy, if I'm not mistaken, if I read correctly, you were involved in the Sunday paper fairly heavy. Were you not the editor of the magazine that was?
Yeah. I worked with Phil Sykes I was on the Rim at that point.
Right.
And that's where I was hired initially to work on the Rim. I'd never worked on one before, but there I was. Then Phil asked me if I would come and work with the Sunday section. So I was magazine editor, which was really fun because it was made out of whole cloth. We just started a whole new thing there and hired people. That's where Dunford started. I hired Dunford that time. He used to write things for Bruno Gerussi, for Bruno's show on radio. And I was just hunting for somebody with a sense of humor. And Bruno said, try phone Dunford. So I talked to Dunford, and he started this Sunday column. That's where he began. And he was I adored what he wrote. And then he became the Page Six. He moved to Page Six eventually. I don't know who stole him from me. I think it was probably Hartley Stewart. Anyway, and then we had all these other. We had what we called the pleasures pages, which was information about what was going on in the city as far as entertainment goes. And then we tried to also be thoughtful and have think pieces as well. So it was a great deal of fun. That's when Alan Edmonds worked there, and Phil actually he was the Sunday editor, right? Initially.
Right.
So he's the one who started the look of that Sunday paper, which was very British.
Now he's sort of a tragic figure, I guess, in Sun history. I mean, he died not long.
Yeah.
He was probably ill in those first days of the.
Yes, he had cancer, and he came in. He'd sit at his desk. He would hold his head in his hands. He worked hard, but he was very ill.
The great thing was the Star. When the Star started their Sunday paper, they ran a front page story and they said, our market research has discovered that there is a market for a Sunday newspaper. Well, that market research was the Sunday.
In the next newspaper box.
And
by then our circulation was 300,000.
And the way we got the religious leaders on site, we gave them all columns. They all had columns.
We did.
Oh, that was fun trying to deal with those guys. We would have meetings with the group of them, right? And they all had to talk, and they all sermonized at these meetings. It was fun, but man, it was a delicate process, editing those guys, right? Because I was basically a card-carrying atheist, and all these guys were just but we got them on board, this is something Doug did. He, initially the Telly was going to start a Sunday paper. And all of the religious leaders in the community said, well, you can't have a Sunday paper, Sunday's a day of rest, right? So Doug explained to them that actually the Monday paper was put out on Sunday. So all these people were working on Sunday anyway. It was like a little light clicked on. So they agreed that they would back a Sunday paper. And then he gave them also gave them the columns. So that was just a little bit of PR by Doug. And brilliant, really. They got them on board.
Jack Holland, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I got a split, and thanks for the memories.
Nice to see you, Jack. Nice to meet you.
Nice to see you, Jack.
Thanks, Angie.
Welcome.
Good seeing you.
Ciao, Jack.
Hi, Jack.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
Love you.
Do you remember the high? I think we hit 500,000 Sunday And I remember we hit 300,000
Dale.
daily.
That meant that the Sun was a real success story, the little paper that grew.
Oh,
It was those circulation battles that we had, and that's when we really had to be competitive. But one of the things I wanted to say about Doug is the Sun from its beginning was a family, and Doug was the head of that family.
Yeah.
No matter what ideas you had, he would consider them. In most cases, he'd go along with you, and it could happen. But he had a great sense of how Toronto ran and how Toronto reacted. And I remember one day, it was a simple story of a girl terminally ill, little girl, 3 years old, terminally ill in Sick Kids Hospital. And while the family and her brother were visiting, her brother's bike was stolen. And that story ran, and Doug said, "Go and buy the kid a bike, replace that bike."
Yes, yes, yes.
And eventually he said, "Do they want anything else?" And the little girl said she'd like to go to Disney World. And within a week, she was on a flight to Disney World
Yeah.
with the family. And that's what he was like.
Like
We had a
Canton,
very
nothing.
responsive readership, didn't we? I don't know whether all papers do that because that was my only experience, but readers wrote to us. They were really involved, engaged.
I think, Joan, you know what? And that to me was always the secret of the Sun, even looking at it from outside. The paper always talked to its readers. There was always that dialogue going between unlike any other newspaper that I've ever seen, was that dialogue between the reader and the paper, which you didn't find anywhere else back then. You certainly don't find today. Kat?
They had surveys. They had surveys published in the paper that people could fill out and could get their opinions and follow the columns and score them. It was wonderful.
Oh, yeah.
Talk to your readers. Kathy?
I just wanted to say regarding the letters page that one of the very first meetings we had before the week before we started publishing was an editorial, the group of us just around a table talking about what we were going to do. One of them was the Sunshine Girl, which wasn't called that then, which we went around the table and voted yay or nay for pictures of girls. I voted nay. Being a feminist, I voted no. And the other thing was they decided they were going to write remarks at the ends of letters to the editor. They were going to reply to them. And I voted nay because I'd been taught, I ran the letters page at the Telly for a while, and I'd been taught that these letters from our readers were sacred and that was their space to speak. And we shouldn't ever interfere with it. So anyway, I voted nay on both of those things. And of course, they're two of the most popular features that the Sun ever had, I think. And I got to love the letters.
First wrote the answers on the letters.
Yeah, Christina was one of the authors of those wonderful remarks at the bottoms of the letters.
And
Very fun.
sometimes you'd run a letter just so you could have a snarky comment.
John Downey, you wanted to say something? John Downey?
We have to remember that Don Hunt may have been the money guy and Glenn would deal with them. But Doug and Peter loved being newspaper guys. And their contacts were fantastic. Kel Miller, John Iaboni, Andy Donato, you guys know that in your areas of expertise, the police chief would phone Doug. Or the homicide detective would phone Doug. If you talk to Peter, Peter would be talking to the major general in charge of the military in Ottawa. So the prime minister, the premier, I can remember chatting with the Chief Justice of Ontario in the basement of Doug's house on Cool Avenue. They loved being everything about the newspaper business they loved, they savored. They were newspaper guys to their core, and as a result, that helped us survive.
Yeah, I was thinking about that when the RCMP searched our offices. They tapped my phone also. They came in on a Friday, and I will never forget that. I went home Saturday morning. A friend of mine phoned me, and we could hear. We talked afterwards, and she said, "I could hear someone on your phone." I said, "Yeah, I know. I could hear someone too." But that was the most extraordinary situation, if you remember that, when Peter was going to be charged under the Official Secrets Act. I mean, that was crazy. They came in and they searched Peter's office, and I don't know if he deliberately moved one of the tiles in the ceiling, but they were sure that he'd hidden this piece of paper. And actually what they were looking for, you remember his desk was always piled up with papers, and what he was looking for was actually sitting right on the top of his desk. But they went through all his files, they went through my desk, and they were four quite very attractive Mounties, as Mounties are wont to be, and they wanted to search me, and Peter came rushing out and said, no, you can't search him. And I was kind of saying, really, Peter, I can take one for the team. And, I'm good to go. But it was really a crazy situation if you think about it.
Didn't they also want to search Bob McDonald's desk? Want to look at his 5 foot high pile of newspapers.
Yeah.
I don't think Doug was all that happy to be his co-conspirator.
No, he was not lighthearted about it at all. He got really mad at me when he and I were probably at lunch, and he expressed, a desire not to go to prison. And I said, well, look at it this way, maybe they'll give you a cell next to your old pal, Harold Ballard. He did not find amusing.
Speaking of Harold Ballard, one of the things that made sports such a great time to cover at that time was we had the type of personalities that were made for page one headlines. Leo Cahill.
Oh yeah.
At the time at the heyday of the Argonauts. Harold Ballard, first going to prison and coming out of prison, and all the stuff that he would say. I mean, that was a time when, the ownerships of teams had people that you could blame when things went wrong, as opposed to now where you can't blame anybody. But John Downing was absolutely correct. Doug had the contacts for all these people in sports as well. Mm-hmm. And the one thing I will say about Doug is that all those years, whenever we would take people to task and write something, and knowing that they were friends of either both George Gross or Doug Creighton, they never ever once came to me and to people in our sports department and said, stop doing that or write something more favorable. We were always left to do what we thought was the right thing. And that says a lot about the people we were working for and with. And we can never let that go unmentioned, because, as I say, we never were told what to write. And we were always supported, even though we knew that sometimes we were criticizing friends of the higher ups.
Doug was a extravagant man. I mean, there's no question that there was a lot of money being spent. Was he too, in hindsight, was he too extravagant?
Good question.
I don't think so. I mean, he spent money where it was important. If you had to cover a story, the money was there.
Right.
And he recognized the value of entertaining the advertisers, mm-hmm. and treating his family, and I'm talking about the people at the paper, probably above and beyond, but it paid dividends.
I think somebody like that, maybe Connie, do you think that kind of style would work today?
You asking me?
Yeah.
Good grief. Yeah, I do.
But surely the point is that through all of this expensive stuff, the paper was making a profit.
Mm-hmm.
The paper made money, so it worked.
Yeah.
When people get on Doug's back about his expenses, it just infuriates me.
As you stand here now, I mean, you people were instrumental in it starting up. You made your careers there, you made your names there, you had a huge impact on the place. Sitting here now, what do you think the legacy is? Andy, do you want to start?
Oh,
you designed that baby.
That's a tough one. It's not the paper it used to be, that's for sure.
You still work there, so.
But it's not, I don't think it's being run the way, well, everything's changed. The internet has changed everything. I often wonder where we would be if Doug and Peter and Don were still around. I think we'd probably be better off than we are now. I don't have any idea what the circulation is. All I know is that, they just told me once my contract ran out, you're doing 1 cartoon a week and that's it. And it was cut by 40% what they paid me. They cut everybody all the freelancers were cut by 40%. So I just don't know what to say about it.
Well, can I add something, Andy?
Yeah.
I think that if they listened to Dave Blizzard, who was quite a seer about what was going on. Remember Canoe?
Yeah.
Canadian Online Explorer. We had our own search engine. We had our own email. A lot of people didn't have computers at the time, and he turned out to be a prophet without honor because they got rid of Dave, as Chris can tell you better than me.
John Iaboni?
Yeah, I was just going to say that when I left the Sun in '84, it was a combination of some personal things that we were going through at that time where I felt I needed to spend more time with my family. And forever, I'll never forget Doug Creighton telling me, he said that, George is pretty upset with you for leaving. But I'm sure that, if you ever want to come back and that we'd welcome you back. We'd love to have you here. You know that because he envisioned me as being a guy that could eventually replace George. And I just didn't see that was going to happen anytime soon. So I left, and George never really forgave me until the year that he died, when I called him and I said, look, this has got to stop because, for all these years, if I was involved in a venture, you would, not write good things about it, whatever. I mean, I never left because of anything to do with you. I left because I had to do some different things with my family. And I would, if you had ever called me, I would have come back in a heartbeat. I'm a Sun guy. But to me, as an outsider, what I noticed about the Sun was that when Sun people stopped being the ones running it, that's when the problems happened.
Yep.
We're Sun people, like all the people here. We're Sun people, and if we could go back and do everything again, have that opportunity to do it again, we would do it.
Yes.
And there are a lot of people that have had opportunities to start things up and do whatever. And you ask them, they say it was the worst mistake of my life. That was the best things in our lives. And those years, as I say, to me, that's when I started to see the change in the Sun. I'm sad it's gone the way that it's gone because of all the things that we put into it. But they can never take away what we did. No. They can never take away us making it and us making it the little paper that grew and us being Sun people. And that's all I'm saying. If you look back at where the thing started to decline, everybody that made it decline were not Sun people.
Culture of the Sun changed the moment that those two guys walked into Doug Creighton's office and fired him.
One of the saddest things to me is what's happened to the building that we helped build on King Street.
Yeah.
A supermarket, a liquor store, God knows what else.
The Globe.
That was such a proud day when we started up our presses for the first time in May of 1975 and published a Sunday Sun. It was, and then we expanded because we had bought the Financial Post.
Kathy,
I just wanted to not let this moment go by, these moments, without saying hello to Paul Rimstead. I think that he sold more papers. He got the spirit of the Sun in his columns, and he was a huge force at the very beginning and for some years afterwards. And I just wanted to say that.
And when we talk about how disappointed we are in the Sun today, I think we should make it clear we're not talking about the people who still work there.
No. They work so hard. They work really hard.
Because they are really working very hard.
Really
Maybe
hard.
just
Yeah.
as hard as the day oneers did, because
Exactly.
they have no resources.
It was a great place to work. And
Yes.
it was just, the bottom line is you worked your ass off, but it was a great place to work your ass off.
Somebody used to do a list of the best companies to work for in Canada, and the Sun made it
Yep.
year after year, and that stopped a long time ago.
And you didn't work for Doug, you worked with them.
Yeah,
His door, talk about a door always open. You could always go in there and argue with them or fight with them. God knows how many times I did that. It just, I'd never seen anything like it. It was just, you loved to go to work in the morning.
Yes.
That was the one thing
yes.
I enjoyed for 50 years, maybe not quite 50, but I loved going into work in the morning.
But you know, it says a lot. It says a lot about being able to go to work and basically knowing everybody. I mean, you know, whether it was in the composing room, whether it was in the production office, whether it was in sports, or I used to love Kathy coming across, hi, and then she would say something about her effing shoes, and these are my effing shoes, and stuff like that. I mean,
I never used
everybody-
effing ever.
Yes, you did. Yes, you
Not
did.
effing.
I'm going to say it right now. But
I heard you.
but knowing everybody, I mean, knowing, you know, from Margaret and Jean and Mrs. K at the desk, and you know, I mean, and it was just in March. I mean, you couldn't go through there without saying hi to everybody, and that was special. That was really, really special. No, it wasn't just knowing the people in sports. I mean, we knew everybody. You know, I mentioned earlier on the story and talking about guys like Donnie Nixon and Dougie Payne. I mean, they were family. I mean, you know, Christina Smales, I'd walk in when you were first secretary, I'd see you there. You were the first person we'd see. Hi, Christina, how you doing? You know, Linda, you know, I mean, you can't, there's not a price you can put on that. I mean, we know it's right here. And I'm patting my heart.
Yeah. My mother had an expression, as the head goes, so goes the body. And in this case, as the head went, so went the body.
Remember Christmas bonus day when we all went up to the boardroom on the 6th floor, and there'd be a cop up there guarding all this.
One of the things about, I don't know if they, when I was away, that always impressed me with the Sun was the sabbatical.
Yep.
Where you had
I didn't have one yet.
off with pay, and then you add your 4 weeks to that. And the original idea was they would send you to England, and you had to look at newspapers over there and whatnot. And that didn't last a year. And then it was do whatever the hell you want, but you got to write something about it when you come back. And I mean, it was phenomenal taking 12 weeks off with pay.
Mhm.
Nobody ever did that.
Anybody else? Anybody want to say something before we sign off?
I just
Cal?
wanted to say one thing about Lac Canton. It was certainly better food than the King's Plate Open Kitchen. Who had the brilliant idea of putting a bar one flight of stairs down from a newsroom?
Well, I think Jack Holland was actually trying to say something about the Coke machine that was in the newsroom.
Yeah.
The photographers brought in this Coke machine, which dispensed product at 25 cents, and it was loaded with beer. So, unfortunately, it didn't last that long, but
It's had gotten in lieu of pay.
it was one of the first acquisitions they made.
I just want to raise my glass to all of you
Hey,
and say the ones that were the day
Cheers,
winners.
everybody.
Cheers, everybody, and to
This
thank
is water.
Mike and Peter and John Cosway. Thank you for everything, okay? And
Indeed.
thanks for the memories to everybody else, okay?
It was almost as much fun as being back there then.
Almost. It's good to see everybody.